Petra asks, when the controlled capacity of Disney World is called off, do you foresee a future, a crush of crowds because of pent-up demand? Or do you think the parks will remain quiet for a while? So obviously she's asking about whether or not after all of these temporary restrictions sort of wear off, do you anticipate the parks are going to fill right back up the way that they used to be? Or are you expecting crowds to be a little bit more hesitant in terms of approaching the four theme parks of Walt Disney World, and maybe travel continues to just have a slow burn rather than a full raging fire like it was prior to the coronavirus hitting? Katrina, you're the travel professional among us who's just so well spoken and well read. What do you think when it comes to this sort of a question?
Well, so in my thoughts, I don't see it happening like if they do decide to like have it full capacity again. The main question is how about the rules for 6 feet apart, or not 6 feet apart, because if it's full capacity, that's just out the window.
Right.
But with the masks, because that's the main thing, right? So there are a lot of people around the United States that don't agree with the masks, and they have canceled their annual passes. They are very boisterous about how they just don't believe in this stuff. And so I feel like if they do go back to 100% capacity and they still force people to wear masks, we're not going to see a bum rush of people, because there still will be reserved people that refuse to go to Disney until they get rid of the masks rule. And then if they do go back to full capacity and, masks are, optional, then you might see a lot more people coming back into Disney World. But it just depends on their mask rule, because I feel like that's what's holding people back, because a lot of people don't agree on it. I agree that everybody should wear a mask for the time being, but a lot of people don't. So I think that's the main thing, I guess.
Sure. So Tyler, say masks are off the table. Everything is back to, quote, normal, or as normal as it can be. Those temporary restrictions have expired. Do you see a crush of humanity making their way into the parks, or do you think the travel industry is going to take a while to really get restarted again?
I personally think that I think the first few days are probably going to be crowded, maybe the first couple days, but then unfortunately, even without the mask, like you said, even if they didn't force you to wear a mask, I hate to say this, but a lot of people are really struggling financially, and even people that think they might have a job when all this is over, probably a lot of them won't have a job, and a lot of businesses are going to close and not be able to recover. And Disneyland's expensive. Like, make no mistake, it is a treat to be able to afford Disneyland, and I feel bad for the millions of people who have lost their job or have been furloughed. And then, a lot of companies out there aren't really being necessarily forward with their employees, and they'll say, oh yeah, you're furloughed. And then really what their plan is to just fire the people at the end. And that's a horrible thing. That's a horrible reality that we're living through right now. But, the only thing that has happened in my lifetime that I can even slightly compare it to is 9/11. And I just don't even think that's a fair comparison. But just remember how much the park suffered then.
Sure. And
this is even worse. This is way worse. And it's affecting everyone around the world, not just Americans. So it's going to be slow. I think it's going to be pretty slow.
Garrett, the analysts have been coming out more and more from a financial perspective, talking about how much money Disney's losing, how much money they will lose in this process. But the other thing that they've really focused on is attendance, and something that we saw very early on, prediction-wise, was that when it comes down to crowds, it's going to take up to 2 years, and I've seen this in 2 different analyst reports from 2 different banks. It's going to take 2 years for crowds to recover to pre-pandemic levels. Do you think that that's something that's realistic? You think the analysts got it wrong, maybe, or what say you?
The analysts get paid a lot more money than I do to do their job, but I think that, of course, they're starting off with this limited capacity, which will just say 30%. and then it goes into the next phase, which is in OK 50, then 70. So as the phases get better and better, allowing more and more freedoms in the park and around the country and the world, the economy will boost at the same time. So like 2 years does sound realistic, but I think if I really think a year and a half, that things might be a lot easier, and then we'll see a rush. Maybe not like a rush like 4th of July, but I'm thinking a couple weeks before spring break or something, because I like the day that just keeps popping into my mind are February crowds. February crowds are some of the smallest crowds just because in February everyone's in school. You only really get a big turnout for like President's Day or all that in the middle of the month. So I could really see like maybe levels at that, which are maybe like 75-80% of park capacity. That to me is a dream come true for Disney, because there's still going to be a little bit of distance, but eventually things will get better. And what it will essentially come down to, it will be when states are opening up and there's a lot more, like when people have their jobs back, then there'll be a rush. If people don't have money, people aren't going to go to the parks. People aren't going to do multiple mortgages and take out credit cards just to go to Disney. They'd rather feed their families first. So the analysts seem pretty on it, but I'm going to say wishful thinking, and hopefully by maybe next June in 1 year, things will be a lot better.
Yeah, I think point raised there about the whole idea with people not having jobs at the other end of this and financially things being far worse off than they were will definitely play into whether or not there's going to be a pent up, crush of humanity that comes flowing back into these parks. Pre-pandemic, I would say that Disney parks were getting to a point where there really was no off season. Every time you were there, it was just very busy. And even those traditionally off season times, like I would specifically go in those times at Walt Disney World where it was quiet, and I knew it would be quiet, and even the quiet times were becoming more and more busy. Not unbearable, not Christmas week crowds, which are traditionally some of the worst, but I would go in September, right? Hurricane season, most disgusting weather possible in Orlando happens usually during August, September, and I would go then because I thought, at least I'm not going to have to deal with the crowds. I can get a lot more done. But I was even seeing more and more crowds, more and more kids out of school, all of a sudden being pulled out of school to come to these trips. And so it was just becoming more and more saturated all year round, and not necessarily even during the times where you would expect. So I definitely think that on the other end of this, we are going to see perhaps a delay in these theme parks getting back to normal. I think there's going to be an initial hesitation from most people, especially those that are, still uber concerned about coronavirus leading out of this, even past a vaccine. People that are very concerned about health and safety, probably waiting and seeing and wanting to know what it's going to be like first. So I definitely think that we're going to see potentially 6 months or so after a vaccine is created, or 6 months or so after these temporary restrictions sort of expire. I think it's going to be about that time frame before you really see parks start to pick up again. But 6 months isn't a long time. I just think that you're going to see a lot of folks sort of reserve that wait and see approach. And those that don't have money are going to have to start saving again, and definitely have to look at ways in which they can still get to their Magic Kingdom. A lot to consider there. We appreciate the question.
To all who come to this happy place, welcome.